Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Judges chapter 7, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 17. Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, and his men got up the next morning and camped near the spring of Harod. The Midianites were camped north of them near the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to hand Midian over to you. Israel might brag, 'Our own strength has delivered us.' Now announce to the men, 'Whoever is shaking with fear may turn around and leave Mount Gilead.' 22,000 men went home. 10,000 remained. The Lord spoke to Gideon again. 'There are still too many men. Bring them down to the water, and I will thin the ranks some more. When I say, this one should go with you, pick him to go. When I say, this one should not go with you, do not take him.' So he brought the men down to the water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, 'Separate those who lap the water as a dog laps from those who kneel to drink.' 300 men lapped. The rest of the men kneeled to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, 'With the 300 men who lapped, I will deliver the whole army, and I will hand Midian over to you. The rest of the men should go home.' The men who were chosen took supplies and their trumpets. Gideon sent all the men of Israel back to their homes. He kept only 300 men. Now the Midianites were camped down below in the valley. That night the Lord said to Gideon, 'Get up, attack the camp, for I am handing it over to you. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and listen to what they are saying. Then you will be brave and attack the camp.' So he went down with Purah, his servant, to where the sentries were guarding the camp. Now the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people from the east covered the valley like a swarm of locusts. Their camels could not be counted. They were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, he heard a man telling another man about a dream he had. The man said, 'Look, I had a dream. I saw a stale cake of barley bread rolling into the Midianite camp. It hit a tent so hard, it knocked it over and turned it upside down. The tent just collapsed.' The other man said, 'Without a doubt, this symbolizes the sortie of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God is handing Midian and all the army over to him.' When Gideon heard the report of the dream and its interpretation, he praised God. Then he went back to the Israelite camp and said, 'Get up, for the Lord is handing the Midianite army over to you.' He divided the 300 men into 3 units. He gave them all trumpets and empty jars with torches inside them. He said to them, 'Watch me and do as I do. Watch closely. I am going to the edge of the camp. Do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, you also blow your trumpets all around the camp. Then say, "For the Lord and for Gideon." Gideon took 100 men to the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guards. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars they were carrying. All 3 units blew their trumpets and broke their jars. They held the torches in their left hand and the trumpets in their right. Then they yelled, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." They stood in order all around the camp. The whole army ran away. They shouted as they scrambled away. When the 300 men blew their trumpets, the Lord caused the Midianites to attack one another with their swords throughout the camp. The army fled to Beth Shittah on the way to Zerah. They went to the border of Abel Meholah near Tabbath. Israelites from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh answered the call and chased the Midianites. Now Gideon sent messengers throughout the Ephraimite hill country who announced, Go down and head off the Midianites. Take control of the fords of the streams, all the way to Beth Barah and the Jordan River." When all the Ephraimites had assembled, they took control of the fords, all the way to Beth Barah and the Jordan River. They captured the 2 Midianite generals, Oreb and Zeb. They executed Oreb on the rock of Oreb, and Zeb in the winepress of Zeb. They chased the Midianites and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon, who was now on the other side of the Jordan River. The Ephraimites said to him, "Why have you done such a thing to us? You did not summon us when you went to fight the Midianites." They argued vehemently with him. He said to them, "Now what have I accomplished compared to you? Even Ephraim's leftover grapes are better quality than Abieser's harvest. It was to you that God handed over the Midianite generals, Oreb and Zeb. What did I accomplish to rival this?" When he said this, they calmed down. Now Gideon and his 300 men had crossed over the Jordan River, and even though they were exhausted, they were still chasing the Midianites. He said to the men of Succoth, "Give some loaves of bread to the men who are following me, because they are exhausted. I am chasing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The officials of Succoth said, You have not yet overpowered Zebah and Zalmunna, so why should we give bread to your army? Gideon said, Since you will not help after the Lord hands Zebah and Zalmunna over to me, I will thresh your skin with desert thorns and briars. He went up from there to Penuel and made the same request. The men of Penuel responded the same way the men of Succoth had. He also threatened the men of Penuel, warning, When I return victoriously, I will tear down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their armies. There were about 15,000 survivors from the army of the eastern peoples. 120,000 sword-wielding soldiers had been killed. Gideon went up to the road of the nomads east of Nobah and Jogbaha and ambushed the surprised army. When Zebah and Zalmunna ran away, Gideon chased them and captured the two Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. He had surprised their entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He captured a young man from Succoth and interrogated him. The young man wrote down for him the names of Succoth's officials and city leaders, 77 men in all. He approached the men of Succoth and said, Look what I have, Zebah and Zalmunna. You insulted me, saying, You have not yet overpowered Zebah and Zalmunna, so why should we give bread to your exhausted men? He seized the leaders of the city along with some desert thorns and briars. He then threshed the men of Succoth with them. He also tore down the tower of Penuel and executed the city's men. So you have some 32,000 that gather to help Gideon against the Midianites initially. But the Lord pares that down so that only 300 are left out of all of those. And during the night, they go up and attack the Midianite camp. And the Lord causes the Midianites to attack one another, despite them having so many people. In 7:12, it says, Now the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people from the east covered the valley like a swarm of locusts. Their camels could not be counted. They were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. So there were a lot of people there, more than 300. But God miraculously delivered Israel through the hand of Gideon and these 300 men, and stepped in miraculously and intervened. So, because it's not normal for 300 men to defeat more men than the sand on the seashore. Now, despite this miraculous victory, the men of Ephraim are upset at Gideon, complaining that they didn't get to fight with Gideon against the Midianites. But Gideon wisely placates them by saying, "Oh, what I've done isn't anything big. It's nothing compared to what you guys have been doing." So. And then you have both the men of Succoth and the men of Penuel denying Gideon's small force bread, which I guess points towards several things. I think it points towards the scarcity of food in general in the land, because the Midianites were severely oppressing the Israelites. And at the start of this, Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine press. So that should tell you that part of the target of the Midianites was the produce of Israel. So it was precious. And apparently they didn't believe that Gideon's small force could conquer the Midianites, and were even unwilling to spare enough bread for 300 men. Yeah, but I mean, these are Israelites too, and they should be aware of, the exploits of past judges and the exploits of Israel in general under Joshua and Moses, how the Lord helped them in defeating their enemies. But despite that, the men of Succoth and Penuel don't have any faith in either Gideon or God. So, and then Gideon punishes them. So, carrying on, Luke chapter 23, verses 13 through 43. When Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, Then Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. When I examined him before you, I did not find this man guilty of anything you accused him of doing. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, he has done nothing deserving death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him. But they all shouted together, Take this man away, release Barabbas for us. This was a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city, and for murder. Pilate addressed them once again because he wanted to release Jesus. But they kept on shouting, Crucify him! Crucify him! A third time he said to them, Why? What wrong has he done? I have found him guilty of no crime deserving death. I will therefore flog him and release him. But they were insistent, demanding with loud shouts that he be crucified. And their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, who had been thrown in prison for insurrection and murder, but he handed Jesus over to their will. As they led him away, they seized Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country. They placed the cross on his back and made him carry it behind Jesus. A great number of the people followed him, among them women who were mourning and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children, for this is certain. The days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore children, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if such things are done when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? 2 other criminals were also led away to be executed with him. So when they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. But Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. Then they threw dice to divide his clothes. The people also stood there watching, but the rulers ridiculed him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who was hanging there railed at him, saying, Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Don't you fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we rightly so, for we are getting what we deserve for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. Because the sun's light failed, the temple curtain was torn in two. Oh. It's only supposed to read to 43. Oh well. So you have Jesus standing before Herod. Pilate, and then Herod, and then Pilate again. And Pilate says essentially that, neither he nor Herod has found anything wrong with this man, despite that they mocked him and were intending to flog him before releasing. That's a nice way to treat an innocent citizen. But despite them finding him innocent and not deserving of death, the crowd themselves pleaded to have a murderer and an insurrectionist given over to them rather than Jesus, who had done nothing wrong. Which I think is pretty indicative of just the human state, that when people don't choose God, they choose death and destruction instead. That is, every good thing comes from God, and choosing not God is cutting off your nose to spite your face. So I think even as he was being crucified, you have him prophesying to people. Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For this is certain, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore children, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. I think Jesus is prophesying about the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD, where there was a siege as part of that, and sieges are terrible things because they induce starvation in the populace that has been sieged, and that gets ugly really, really quick because people need something to eat, and so they eat each other. Yeah. Yeah. Also, you have Jesus being led away and crucified between these two criminals. That is, he was numbered with transgressors. So much of this is prophesied elsewhere. They threw dice to divide his clothes. Even what they're saying about him, he saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. And them offering sour wine for him to drink. But one of the criminals judged rightly and said, don't you fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, and asks that Jesus remember him when he comes into his kingdom. So the mortality that this man experienced, knowing that his death was sure and soon, put into perspective that he should get right with God. Carrying on, Psalm 97, verse 1, through chapter 98, verse 9. The Lord reigns, let the earth be happy, let the many coastlands rejoice. Dark clouds surround him, equity and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him, on every side it burns up his enemies. His lightning bolts light up the world, the earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of the whole earth. The sky declares his justice, and all the nations see his splendor. All who worship idols are ashamed, those who boast about worthless idols. All the gods bow down before him. Zion hears and rejoices. The towns of Judah are happy because of your judgments, O Lord. For you, O Lord, are the sovereign king over the whole earth. You are elevated high above all gods. You who love the Lord hate evil. He protects the lives of his faithful followers. He delivers them from the power of the wicked. The godly bask in the light. The morally upright experience joy. You godly ones rejoice in the Lord. Give thanks to his holy name. Sing to the Lord a new song, for he performs amazing deeds. His right hand and his mighty arm accomplish deliverance. The Lord demonstrates his power to deliver. In the sight of the nations, he reveals his justice. He remains loyal and faithful to the family of Israel. All the ends of the earth see our God deliver us. Shout out praises to the Lord, all the earth. Break out in a joyful shout and sing. Sing to the Lord, accompanied by a harp and the sound of music, with trumpets and the blaring of the ram's horn. Shout out praises before the King, the Lord. Let the sea and everything in it shout, along with the world and those who live in it. Let the rivers clap their hands, let the mountains sing in unison before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He judges the world fairly, and the nations in a just manner. And finally, Proverbs chapter 14, verses 7 and 8. Leave the presence of a foolish person, or you will not understand wise counsel. The wisdom of the shrewd person is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deception. Yeah. The wisdom of the shrewd person is to discern his way. That is, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, and by his light we see light. That is, by understanding the reality of God and who he is, we understand truth and can therefore make rational decisions on concrete things. But foolishly, some people say that there is no truth and thus live in a haze that deceives not only themselves but all who follow them. So, anyway, thank you for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.